welcome to the Westport Library. Woohoo! Um, we do have some guests at home and in the building, which I'm so thrilled by. So if anybody has any questions at any time, for those of you in the room, we're just going to be repeating your question. And for anybody who's watching from home, you'll be able to type into the Q&A tab and I will read it out at the end of the conversation. So let's get started. Welcome to Saugatuck Scribes. This is part of a series that highlights our own Westport authors and their newest books. If you're interested in seeing other Westport authors, we have recordings of them on westportlibrary.org, and a lot of them are really great interviews and fun topics. Tonight's a little different from the usual event, as we usually have two authors, each with one book that they're talking about. Today we have one author with two books. So Lisa Cloherty is a pediatric speech language pathologist who grew up dreaming of stories she wanted to share. Her picture books are Katie Spector, the Art Collector, and Terrance the Hothead. Our moderator this evening is Michaela MacColl. She's the author of middle grade novels, including her most recent, View from Pagoda Hill. And for those of you in the building tonight, Lisa has copies of her books for you to purchase, and she'll sign them. So without further ado, Michaela and Lisa, tell us about your books.
Hi, Lisa. Hi. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you for having me be your moderator. I usually write novels, so the idea of writing picture books is, I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is not to have 70,000 words to play with, but to only have 1,000. So I thought we'd start with Katie Spector, the Art Collector, which I think is a great title. And one thing I really liked about this is that it's a story about a young girl who does a lot of artwork. And so much artwork her mother is trying to tamp down on how much artwork they keep in the house, but Katie's too clever for her with unforeseen results. This spoke to me as a parent in a way, because I think we've all had too much artwork. But what I really liked was how this is not about the parents. This is about Katie and what Katie wants. And I wondered if you had a Katie in your life that inspired this book.
I do have a Katie in my life. Well, the book definitely was inspired by my daughter. In her kindergarten class, they had a creation station, or they called the Tinker Station, and they did it in preschool as well. And every day she would come home with bags and bags of art, plastic things taped with things on top, and with all these beautiful prized possessions that she had. And we started keeping them, and after a few weeks, the piles got bigger and bigger, and it inspired my imagination. I thought, where will we keep all this art? What will we do with it? And so those were sort of the questions and ideas that inspired the book.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, it's an exponential question. If you add enough art, eventually, it's got to go somewhere.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the illustrations in this book. They're wickedly funny, and they're usual. They're very fresh, they're charming. And I was wondering, I know this is a book that you put together yourself. How did you find this illustrator?
So because this book is self-published, it sort of gave me the ability to really expand. I didn't have a publisher who was giving me options, or sometimes they give no options at all. So with this book, I really started from the ground up, and a lot of it was a learning experience, since this was my first book, and it was the first time I was doing all of this. And so I used sort of my connections in the speech world. I was working at the time as a professor at Sacred Heart, teaching speech pathology. And so through those connections in their art program, I was connected with the director at University of New Haven. And he was really open to the idea. He loved the idea of having me come in and give his students the opportunity to sort of pitch being the illustrator for the book. And so right before the pandemic, like January 2020, I went to University of New Haven and I met with their whole illustration program, which was small. It was only maybe 25 people. And I read them the book, just the text. And I basically gave them one spread and said, I'd love to see what your vision is for the story, to see if it connects with the vision that I had in my mind when I created the book. And through that, it sort of became, I guess, a little bit of a contest where there was a handful of students that were all excited and energized by the book and the topic. And it definitely, I think, resonated with them because they're, as art students, to write a book about kids who love creating art. I think it resonated with a lot of them. They saw themselves in the story. And ultimately, the illustrator, David Rodriguez, it was, for me, it was a no-brainer. I mean, he submitted to me, it was a pretty rough sketch, but what I loved about it was that he had all of these ideas that I hadn't thought of for ways to add to the story and to the text. And I think when you're writing picture books, there's a portion of it that's you and what you're creating, and then there's so much more that the illustrator adds and layers to the story. And even, for example, like Beakers, who was Katie's bird, in the text, when I wrote it alone, it was really nothing more than just, she had a bird.
Mhm.
And David really saw Beakers, the bird, like elevating to a more important character. And so halfway through the book, he has Beakers escaping from his cage, and then you can find him and sort of spot him through all the illustrations until in the end, in the last picture, Beakers is there with her, and it sort of closed that storyline of them together. So I loved that he had such a strong vision for the book, and so ultimately we decided to work together, and it was really like a beautiful experience. He and I became friends, and we had barbecues, and we did this whole thing through the pandemic, and it took longer than we thought it would, but I couldn't have been prouder of like what we did together, what we created. And I think ultimately one of the best parts about him being a student was that we learned together and we were both really open to each other's suggestions.
And I would guess tolerant of mistakes,
Yes.
which is something you don't have the liberty to do when it's in the publishing or traditional world.
Yes.
Because I think it's so fascinating because he really turned it on its head. I mean, I just sold a picture book and I was told, oh, this is the illustrator. What do you think? And if I said no, it wouldn't have mattered the least, right? Every book I publish, they show me the cover and they say, what do you think? It doesn't matter if I don't like it. But you got to really connect with your artist and see your story through, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it set me up for what came next with having a traditional picture book, because I really had my hands in every piece of it, and every aspect of the book I was able to give feedback on and collaborate on. And I think in that it was a collaboration in the truest sense of communication and working together and creating a joint vision.
Yeah, I know several people who've never met their illustrators.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
It seems so. It seems such a waste, but I think it's a big power that the editors hold on to.
Yes.
They want to make that connection. They want to say, oh, I see things in the story that the author hasn't seen. This artist can do it. But you cut out that middleman. So let's talk about self-publishing.
Yeah.
What made you decide to self-publish this?
So I had thought about it over time. This book, Katie Spector, I wrote almost a year before I decided to self-publish it. And my plan wasn't originally to self-publish. I wanted to traditionally publish it, and I sent it out in all the traditional avenues. I did query letters. I sent it to agents and editors and small publications and big publications. And I mean, I'm sure it's hours and hours of work. Writing all of those individual letters. Pitching your story and your vision to somebody else. And ultimately, I had a lot of success and a lot of interest, but it never led to publication. And this story, like so many other stories as writers, like it really had my heart in a special place. And I couldn't just put it in a box and leave it for later. It was, and I've done that with many other manuscripts, but this I just couldn't. And I was fortunate enough to connect with Jane Green, who's an author, through a friend. And she sat with me and read the story, and she just said, like, why not just do it yourself? And honestly, I hadn't even thought about it until that point. And at first I was like, I don't know, it's so much work. And she's like, but you're going to have to market it yourself. You're going to have to do some legwork on here. And she's like, this is too good and it's too important to you to just let it pass by. And so I think that's how I decided to take the jump into self-publishing.
Now, I once thought for my first novel, by the state, they sent me the project plan.
Right.
I don't know if I shouldn't see the project plan, but I've never seen that in either book. And there were 400 steps.
Yeah.
From acquiring the book to getting returns back from Barnes and Noble.
Yes.
And my responsibility is only on 4 of those 400.
Yeah.
So how do you even start this process? Because it's such a big job. What do you do first?
Honestly, I think at the beginning, it's the most overwhelming because you see that 400-step future ahead of you. And especially like me, I mean, I was lucky I had a friend or two that had self-published before. And so I did meet with them and I picked their brain. You know, they were kind enough and generous enough to help me sort of give me a general idea of what was to come. But in a lot of ways, the hardest part was the beginning. And then I think I hit points in time where, you know, first it was let's find the illustrator, let's collaborate. And I had some, you know, unexpected mentors along the way. Like even the head of the program, the illustration program, he sat both of us down and said, this is the process in which, you know, first you have a rough sketch, then you have a final sketch, then you should submit it with color. And so even that, I had no idea. I mean, I really didn't know, and neither of us did. And so I think there were points along the way where it felt really smooth, where I was like, yeah, like I got this. Like this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like this is great. And then there was points where, I mean, the stress was so intense that like I couldn't believe like I was in the middle, right? I was like, oh, I've already done this, so I can't back out now. But I still have all these things ahead. So I think just one step in front of the other, coming up with a plan and being flexible because the plan doesn't always go in the way that you think it's going to. And I'll give you an example of a time where I did not know how I was going to get through, but you know, everybody knows now with the pandemic, there's all these shortages, you know, there's delays on shipping and all these other issues and
Shortage of paper.
right, shortage of paper, the printers, everything, shipping, delivery, all of it. And, you know, I got through the whole process. The book was made. I had, you know, a distant cousin edited for me. I had a dear friend who looked at the digital element for me. And it was done and it was ready. And I had about 5 months until I was planning. For me, it was a great undertaking of creating this event and this launch party that I really wanted to celebrate the book and that experience with everybody who I cared about. And the book was supposed to come in 6 weeks on a boat. And that did not happen. And I had many sleepless nights of stress because I was the one. I had 100+ people coming to this party and no books. And I kid you not, the books came the day before the event. It took almost 5 months. And I had family calling the port of authority. I was calling them. I tortured the poor guy at the printing place who was lovely because I called him every day. When will it come? How many more days?
Was it printed in China?
It was printed in China and it was stuck on a boat that was in Los Angeles. And I literally had dreams of the boat and seeing my own package in the boat and swimming over to it to get it.
I mean, we read about supply shortages and all those ships, you know, backed up outside of LA, but it's different when it's your book.
I mean, right. And you have, like I said, just this undertaking there and you're down to the wire. And I kid you not, when the FedEx truck came, I was like screaming in my driveway, cheering, and the guy was like, wow, I wish everybody greeted me that way. Yeah, it'd be the best day ever.
I had a friend who wrote cookbooks based on Star Wars. And one day she posted a video of a container ship breaking in the middle, sinking. And she's like, first of all, everyone got off the ship. No, it's her. But there are 10,000 Darth Vader popsicle cookbooks on the bottom of the video. And you just realize how fragile the whole chain is. So
Right.
that's stressful to hear about. So I'm so glad that I'm on this time. You have books. Now the next part is the hard part. And it's something that whether you're traditionally published, small publisher, big publisher, we all have to do it. Marketing.
Yeah.
I hate it. How about you?
Here's the thing. I love kids. I work with kids. I love engaging with kids. It brings me joy, it makes me happy. And that's so when I get to be somewhere with kids, reading the book and sharing the book, I love it. It's no task for me. I enjoy it, whether it's 10 people or it's 100 people. I love it. But there are other aspects of it that I don't enjoy. I don't think anyone, including myself, likes the idea of self-promotion. It feels awkward. It feels weird to be like, hey, I did this great thing and look at my book. And I think as much as you don't want to do it, you have to, like every other aspect of this, put yourself out there in a way that may make you feel comfortable at times, but I think also makes you grow as like a person and as a writer. And I think I usually leave those experiences happy that I did them and that I had the experience. And ultimately, for me, like picture books were always like so important to me as a kid. I mean, I like my parents have given me books that I look at and it sparks a memory.
Mhm.
It's that feeling of like, oh, I remember, like I loved this book. We read this book together, and that to me is the dream that I hope these books get into enough hands that one day somebody will love these stories enough that when they pack away all their books for their kids, this will be one of the books that they keep. And when they open it up in 30 years or whatever, they'll be like, oh, remember that book? That was awesome. I loved that book. And they'll read it again to their kids.
So you have a long-term marketing plan.
I have a very long-term marketing. I have to live for a really long time to see it through.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very close critique group. We've been together for 20 years, and they're my best promoters. You
Yeah.
know, and one in particular, that's what you need, a pushy best friend.
Yeah.
Who will sit there and say, Michaela's written a book. Michaela's written a book. Have you heard about Michaela's book?
Right.
Do you have people like that in your life?
I definitely do. I have a pushy mom who's definitely knocking down the doors of whatever kids' gym she can find and calling them and going to the mall and oh, my daughter has a book. But I also do have a network of writers that are important to me. I've had also a critique group that was a large critique group and stepped into a small critique group, and we've been together also I think almost 5 years now. And every week we meet. Every couple of weeks when I can get there, but we definitely support each other during the rejections, during the acceptances, and since Terrance signing that book, I have kind of a new network of other authors that we've all teamed together. It's called Picture Book Pals, and there's all of us are international, and we meet once a month, and all of us, the whole goal is to help each other market our books and celebrate each other's books and request them at the libraries. And I think nobody totally knows like other writers know.
Well, I think in particular children's writers.
Yeah.
For any adult writers out there, I don't think they have the same kind of network that we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I can count on. I've met hundreds and hundreds of children's book writers, and I think maybe only 2 of them are me. Words I can't say I'm an adult writer. We all look at this as a group where we support each other.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fascinating.
And I also agree that like writing in itself is like a solo experience, but I think like the kid-led writing community, it has felt like a community. People are really like welcome each other, I think, with open arms, and are like, it doesn't, even though in some ways we're competing for only so many spots in the book, it never feels like that. It always feels like everybody's rooting for each other and then we celebrate each other's successes.
Yeah, I think even like most successful, one of the reasons I see their success is because they're so helpful about giving back.
Yeah.
Someone like Kate Messner.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Yeah.
She just is constantly answering questions, having really inexpensive webinars to talk about how to do a school visit in a virtual world,
I
things like
definitely
that.
watch those. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great.
She's great.
So it does help. And I think if you're going to venture into self-publishing, having a crew behind you really makes a ton of sense.
Definitely.
Let's talk about your second book, because this is a slightly different story. I mean, Terrance the Hothead is, you published this with the, I want to get it right, the American.
It's an American Speech Language Hearing Association,
Okay.
which is ASHA for short.
All right, almost as good as FCBWI. SCY,
Right, yeah,
which is
it's a mouthful.
our organization, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Worst acronym ever. Um, but you publish this. It's a great story on its own, but it's also a pedagogical tool. So can you tell me, did they ask you to write this, or did you show them what you'd written and see if they wanted it?
So it's funny, this book, Terrance and Hothead, that I wrote it working with a student. I had a student I was working with at the time who really was in some ways the essence of Terrance. He was struggling with friendships. He had a lot of social, pragmatic, skills that we were working on. He got upset really quickly. And I was looking at the time for a story, and not necessarily a clinical story, but just a picture book story that I could use in my sessions with him. And I was already writing picture books at the time, but I think because I couldn't really find exactly what I was looking for, I felt like I should just create it myself. And so I wrote the book, and after writing and revising more, I submitted it to Asha, who at that point had only published, I think my book was like the 5th book that they published.
Okay.
So they only published 2 or 3 books a year. They've been doing it for a really short amount of time. Even mine is the 6th, I don't know, but I submitted to them. And originally one of the characters, Lady Gray, was a teacher, but I switched it so that she'd be a speech pathologist, which worked anyway, but I felt like maybe it would work better with their target audience and their message. And pretty quickly afterward, after a few months, they told me I was kind of in the final running, and then they accepted the book, maybe like a month into the pandemic, where my kids were home, everybody was in lockdown, we were homeschooling, we were doing all these things, and to be honest, emotions were running pretty high at that point, right? I mean, it was for adults and kids.
Were they steaming, simmering, or boiling? You should explain that, because people I meant to talk about this at the beginning. Can you tell us about Terrance and his coping mechanism, so that people will get whatever that joke was?
So Terrance is basically a hot-headed teapot who blows his lid and gets upset all the time over seemingly small things that don't feel small to him, they feel big to him. And so I created the terms simmer, steam, and boil. Twofold. One, because they fell into the teapot, puns and jokes that I tried to put in with the abstract language around the book. But also I had them as I repeated those phrases many times through, because from working with kids, I know that usually the things that they take away from a book are what you've repeated a few times throughout the story. And I wanted those terms to be something that parents, educators, therapists, speech pathologists, whoever reading the book could come back to, and then cue their students or the children that in their home or that they're working with by saying, are you a simmer, a steam, or a boil, to sort of represent the varying degrees of what we call in our speech pathology world, like your engine's getting hot, right? So you see the wheels are turning, they're getting, the child's getting upset, and when they've already blown over, that's a hard point to then say, are you a simmer, steam, and a boil? But when you can see at the beginning when there's, that's beginning and we're seeing some frustration growing, the idea is that we can use the story, and it's a humorous story. So the idea is that you can go back to that child and then cue them with those words. Are you a simmer, a steam, or a boil?
And them identifying where they are in that spectrum helps them calm down.
Yes. It's sort of being able to recognize your own emotions. And there's also a lot of tools in the book to sort of help kids with regulating emotions. So taking a deep breath, and a big part of the book was the back matter piece, which really, it's very thorough. Honestly, it's more thorough than I thought when we originally signed on. There's 7 pages of back matter, which is unusual for a picture book, but they really wanted the book to be relatable for kids, functional and usable, and something that educators and parents could look to the back, and when they're having a child that's dealing with these big emotions, be able to use the tools both in the book and in the back matter.
So the back matter is also for parents, not just for teachers.
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Parents and teachers. And yes, and there's a lot of developmental milestones in the back there, and that also is geared, because you assume most therapists already know a lot of the developmental milestones, but parents and some teachers may not. And so being able to look at that, if you have a student or a child, I can't tell if is this what we should be seeing? Is this not what we should be seeing? And then they can look back to that back matter for that information information and those tools to sort of supplement what is really just a universal story.
So it must have been really gratifying, not just to sell a picture book, but to sell a picture book in your field. You know, that's a professional affirmation as well as a literary one.
Yeah, yeah.
How'd you feel when you opened that book? Or that the unboxing for Terrance? Was that exciting?
It was great. It was really, really great. It was so exciting. It had less of the energy, and I mean that in a good way, because with Katie, it was like I was so overwhelmed with the idea of the book not getting there that when Terrance came, it was just like a calm and peaceful experience of like, wow, they're here, and having my family there with me when I opened it, and just like the excitement. We've been talking about the book for so long, and it was joyful. Yeah.
So, what's next?
That's a good question. What's next, I think, is I hope continuing to do what I love, which is working with kids as a speech pathologist, writing for kids as a picture book author. I have a lot of their stories out there, and I hope, that I'm going to continue putting myself out there, and hopefully I'll be back here with some more books coming soon.
Well, do we have any questions?
Is there a possibility of Katie having a sequel?
So the question is, we have to repeat the audience's question for the Zoom people. Is there a sequel for Katie?
So that is a good question. I have written two other books to go with Katie as a series, but I think having done the experience of creating her self-publishing, as much as I enjoyed it, I don't know if I could reel David into doing another one now that he's done with school and he's on to his professional career in illustration. And also, I think I'm shifting my focus. I really enjoyed the traditional publishing, the experience of doing it. And so I'm not going to rule it out, but I would say that maybe, but for now, I think I'm focusing on some other original stories.
I'm thinking Katie Spector with Gold Cross Spector. Yeah.
My kids come up with lots of Katie Spectors, right? Yeah, we've gotten a couple other ideas. I have really good beta readers.
Oh, that's great. My kids are not big historical fiction readers, so they're not that interested. Okay, do we have questions from Zoom?
Not yet, but if you're watching on Zoom, please type them into the Q&A tab and we'll read them out for you. But I do think we have a question in the front.
Yeah, I got a question. Like illustrators, what's the difference between Alex and David? We were trashing David, but it's funny about how Alex stuff.
Okay, so the question is, sorry, you had two different illustrated experiences. One where you went out and found one. How did you find Alex, and how was that experience different?
That was completely different. That's a good question. So because Terrance and Hothead was traditionally published, it pulls you, as you said, away from the illustrator in that I never met Alex and never spoke with him directly, like over Zoom or anything. We connected on social media only because I sort of on the side was like, I love everything you're doing. It looks great. But really, aside from just general, pleasantries, we really never had direct contact with each other. That being said, I do feel fortunate because Ashley was a small publisher. I was very hands-on actually through the whole process. They gave me 6 illustrators when I originally signed on with the book, and they let me choose which illustrator I liked the best. And so they gave me 2 choice. I gave them 2, but Alex was by far my first choice. And so when they they contacted him and he said he was available and that he could publish the book, I was thrilled. And I really had like a very different vision for Terrance in that I wanted something that was bold and clean lines and digital, where Katie Spector was really like sweeping and a bit softer and painted in watercolor. And for Terrance, I was so glad it turned out to be Alex, who's a really seasoned illustrator, because creating an entire book about emotions where every character is an inanimate object is really no small task, and he did it beautifully.
You forget that they're teapots.
Yeah.
I mean, you really do.
He really created a personality for all of them, and he did a great job. I was so happy with it.
my daughter is an illustrator. So I was thinking about that whole school piece where you said that the director was telling him how it was going to go. What a great opportunity for him to learn,
Right.
and for you to get a tutorial at the same time.
Yeah.
The lessons you learned with Alex, or the first one,
Yeah, David, yep.
how did it help with working with Alex? Or
It was, it helped, no, it helped 100%. Because I was so involved in Terrance, they let me come into every meeting when we looked at sketches, when the sketches came in, when the final drawings came in before it was colored, I got to come into every single illustration meeting with the editors, and they let me give my input. There was times where I was like, oh, it's indoor recess, so we need some kind of inclement weather to show that it's coming, or, you know, in one, I actually, it was me with a Coach Iced Tea. I said I just imagined him with like 8 gators, a whistle, and a headband, and I didn't know if he was going to really do it, but he did. He created, I mean, I didn't have a total vision for everybody, but Coach Ice, I saw in my mind, and this is exactly what he looked like.
well, I think you've been lucky. You have a lot more input than any other right now.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Question about when you conceptualized Terrance. Did you conceptualize it specifically to target the organization, or was it more just like something happened and it inspired the story and then it just sort of fit in that box?
So, question is, when you wrote Terrance, was it specifically for Asha, or was there something that inspired it and you wrote it in a different stream?
So that's a good question. The book was not written for Asha, but I think I wrote it through the lens as a speech pathologist working with a child who had difficulty with emotional regulation and emotional identification. And so I think when I was looking for the right home for the book, Asha felt like the right fit for it.
What about distribution? How did you pick that?
The question is distribution, which I think is always one of the big bugaboos for people thinking, how am I going to get my book out there?
Sure. Is this for which book?
Terrance.
For Terrance. So
No, that was the word. Yes.
so briefly, Terrance, the distribution aspect, one of the best parts was of doing traditional publishing is that they handle all of that, right? Once the book is in creation, the rest is sort of up to them. And I hope the marketing and all of that, but the distribution and some of the sales and stuff goes through that. With Katie, it was probably, I think that is one of the most challenging pieces was distribution. And to be honest, it's been a force that I have done basically day in and day out since the book came out. So I've been going to farmers market events. I created an event, Earthplace. I made a story walk for the story, which I did I've used it a few different places where I could do a book event where I read it. I've done it at a kids book festival, at bookstores, and even getting the book in stores. You know, most bookstores don't have traditionally published books that they accept at their store, and Katie is in 4 publisher. I mean, it's in 4 bookstores right now, and so that was really just calling. I mean, calling, sending a copy of the book, coming myself, showing my passion and enthusiasm for the story, and it's done really well.
Well, some of those ideas are really clever. Doing a story walk makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I lurk in a few Facebook groups for marketing books. And I usually just like, oh, I can't do it. But I mean, the whole farmers market, creating your own reading events. It sounds fun, but exhausting.
So the question was what a story walk is. And basically a story walk is when you print the pages of the book on like a board or a sign, and then you put it out somewhere. So I did a story walk at Earthplace. So there's an area on a trail at Earthplace where kids can walk and they read the book as they walk around.
The Westport Library has one at the point going around to the pavilion, and they change it up. It's really fun, and you'll see kids running from one page to the next.
Yeah.
bringing the books outside. It's very exciting.
And Katie is gonna be in, the Lachat Farm, which is in Weston, it's a farm in Weston. Sometime in the spring, but we haven't nailed down the dates yet.
Oh, they're a big organization.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds like a lot of work. Do you feel like it's worth it?
Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of work. And there's definitely times when surprising, there's times where, you'll be at an event and nobody will come. And you're like, oh, wow, okay, here we are. And then you'll have another event where there'll be tons of people and you'll sell tons of books and you'll have a big audience there when you didn't quite expect it. And so I think just putting yourself out there as much as you can. I have like maybe 8 preschools that I'm going to be reading the book at in the next 2 months. And, part of it is like parents selling the book and a portion of that will go to the school as like a fundraiser. So it's getting as creative as possible, I would say, because I don't have a large platform. I don't have a huge social media following, although, I've done what I can with it and I have a website. But I think it's just been effort sort of by me alone in a lot of ways. Sheer will.
Yeah, this is the place where like, ooh, maybe an editor would be good.
Right.
Just have it so there's no we.
Right.
But it sounds like your family's supportive and you've got
Yes.
your crew of writers.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone else in the room have any questions? Oh, we have one more question.
For all those that book these books, where else can I buy them?
Wait, but that was my question. The gentleman in the audience would like to know how to purchase these books.
So both the books you can find on my website. Spector is sold exclusively on my website or at events where I am. Or Terrance the Teapot. You can also get information through my website, which is lisaclohertybooks.com. But that book you can get on Amazon or through ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, their website as well.
Terrific. Thank you both so much for bringing both Katie and Terrance to life for us. This has been so much fun, and I know that everybody here and others from the past, feel free to go to westportlibrary.org. And thank you all for attending.